Hello everyone, in anticipation of the release of the upcoming strategy game Knights of Honor 2 Sovereign later this year, I went ahead and fired up the original classic from 2004. Now I'd never played it before, but on one of my recent Throwback Thursday streams where we play old PC games every Thursday, Knights of Honor came up in the rotation and I just fell in love with the game almost instantly. For those who don't know, Knights of Honor is like a real-time Total War. It's set in medieval times with 3 different start dates. You manage your empire on the campaign, you're building up your cities, you're managing your family, engaging in diplomacy and recruiting and moving armies, and then when 2 armies meet on the campaign, you can choose to fight out the battle manually, zooming into the battlefield and fighting a more traditional RTS battle.
The enemy stands here. Sire, these are our positions.
And when it comes to Knights of Honor, I'm a little bit biased. I've been talking about little design ideas I have for a real-time grand strategy game, one that uses real movement of armies, not just the region hopping like you get in Paradox games such as EU4 or Hearts of Iron, and not, the turn-based campaigns either, but true, real-time movement on a massive campaign map. And it turns out that Knights of Honor did that 15 years ago, and I just missed it. And not only that, but I've wanted several other things like regional recruitment, deeper empire building, royal family lines, trade goods that actually give you things like buildings and access to units. Knights of Honor does all of this, and it still works really well. I actually feel kind of validated that I just kind of had them as ideas, and I didn't really know if there wasn't some obvious reason that companies just don't do this anymore, like it just doesn't work. But it turns out it really does work, and it works great, and it's exactly what I'd been looking for. Now, it's worth mentioning that the game on Steam is default set to 4:3 aspect ratio, and it does require a mod to make it HD. The mod's in the description, it's very quick to install, the guys behind it have done a great job at making it as painless and seamless as possible, and it certainly has made this video a lot nicer to watch, which is why I've recorded in it. It's totally playable if you play it in 4x3, it's just a nice update for those who can't really bear to put up with that. Now, I should also mention, before we talk about the game in more detail, that I typically don't enjoy old games. Some of my all-time favorites are old games, but I just can't really stand to play them anymore because of camera clunkiness or weird controls. But I've been consistently impressed with how several older titles we've explored on Throwback Thursday have been just huge fun to play. And as someone who missed a lot of these early 2000s games on PC, many of the games feel very innovative and new and fresh to me, and I can't help but wonder where some of these tried and tested great ideas have gone. So if you'd like to see me explore more of these games here on YouTube in videos like this, please let me know in the comments and maybe recommend me some of your favorites from, at a minimum, I'd say about 10 years ago, and I'll check them out. Anyways, let's get into Knights of Honor. So as I said at the top, the game really is like a real-time Total War game, and it's also got some slight elements of Civilization. Now, of course, this game came out in 2004, so I'm sure its genealogy is different, but that's the most apt comparison I have for it today. That's what it feels like now. Starting a campaign, you have 3 different start dates, 1000 AD, 1200 AD, and 1350 AD. You can select any country on the map to play and toggle a few options like your difficulty and whether or not you want the campaign to continue while you're in a battle, as it can just kind of run in the background in real time. And once you're in, the game is basically a giant open sandbox. There's no real objectives, but there are country rankings based on your wealth, your size, total happiness, and a few other ones like how others view you. So let's talk province management. Now first off, you always have a named town as the province capital, and from here you build your buildings and further develop the entire province. Now external to the town, but still within the province borders, there are several smaller points of interest, and they come in 4 different types: the village, the farm, the coastal village, and the monastery. And you don't build in these directly, instead they just get improved as you build things in your town. Now for instance, if you build a tax collector's office in the town, then all of your surrounding villages will get +1 extra gold. If you build a bakery, then all farms produce +1 extra food. So as you can tell, each point of interest has its own role to play based on its type. So a village will be producing gold and workers, a farm produces food, a coastal village produces gold and food, and a monastery produces piety, which is like a religious resource. So, a province that has a lot of villages will end up potentially producing a lot of gold, but here's the interesting thing. At the start of the game, the villages, farms, and monasteries are randomized, so you can't just copy and paste how you build from game to game. You'll have to see what's available and work with it. The same is true for the special resources. Now every town can have up to 3 special resources, and these are going to allow the creation of certain buildings. So for instance, a brine deposit allows you to build a salt mine, and then the salt mine allows you to create a pickler. And the pickler gives you more food storage and food from coastal villages. So it's just interesting how the randomization of these things can really change how you build in a given area, especially when considering building these dependency chains. Now another interesting example would be marble. If you have marble available, you can build a quarry, and with a quarry you can then go on to build a stonemason and also a sculptor's guild. Now stonemason produces columns and a sculptor's guild produces statues, and these can be used to increase your trade with other kingdoms, but also to help you achieve your kingdom advantages. So this screen basically has 10 special projects which are essentially powerful kingdom-wide buffs that you'll be striving to obtain. They basically require you to have a combination of goods in order to activate, and also some exotic goods which can only be obtained through an advanced harbor. And when you have this harbor, you can then pay a lump sum to obtain the resource you want, but also you have to pay to maintain that trade, and it can be quite expensive. So it's just a really fun and in-depth progression system within the empire building. You know, these trade goods are needed just to improve your towns first off. They're also used for trade itself, and then they can also be used for these global buffs if you kind of collect them all. So it's a fun and interesting mechanic to attempt to trade with other empires, or to just seize valuable lands for yourself in order to get your advantages. There's still a bit more to the provinces. They also have workers, food, and population. So workers come from the villages, and the more you have, the faster you're going to be building your new buildings. Food comes from the farms and the coastlines, and they'll restock the province food, which is then used to recruit units and used to supply armies. And lastly, population grows with each building you place down, and it's needed to recruit new units as well. So the interesting thing with this system is that almost all of your resources come from outside of the town. So if a rogue army wanders into your lands, they can raid and pillage your surroundings, really hurting your income. If your food gets lowered, you won't be able to recruit units. If your workers get killed, then buildings will take longer. If your docks are hit, your income suffers. It's really interesting to see how invading forces have a lot of options to weaken their opponents instead of just attacking the towns outright. The raiding and pillaging takes time, so this encourages you to chance coming out of the towns to engage in land battles rather than every fight being a siege. It's quite fun. Now I won't go on too long about the buildings themselves, but essentially you have 18 build slots, and you can then build whatever you want so long as you have the available resources to do it. Then the buildings can be upgraded, and many of them have large dependency chains on needing 3 or 4 upgraded buildings in order to produce a resource, or maybe even up to 10 buildings to make a couple unique units in the area. The only building with a negative effect is the tax building. This lowers province happiness, and then eventually you'll start to get a risk of rebellion where an army can appear and begin raiding your rural areas. Now if it grows and it actually captures the town, a new nation can form, so it really is quite dynamic. And most of the time though, they're just kind of annoyances that hurt your economy, so you'll want to avoid rebellions obviously as much as possible by keeping the towns happy. So overall, in terms of empire building, it's really satisfying and fun to manage. There's just enough going on to make it deep. The resources, the units, the surrounding villages, all of that combined to let you try and figure out what you want to do. Now ultimately though, as you progress and begin to build outward, there's usually then an optimal path for that town that will become clear. Once you don't really need the military buildings or defenses anymore, you can then free up the room you need to get everything else like the resources and make a very strong province. Now while this is completely fine, I do personally prefer having more trade-offs, but with the game constantly moving in real time, it actually works a little bit better to just have things build up and up in a linear fashion, rather than having to revisit the same places over and over to manage things. Now I mentioned unique units briefly. Every empire has their own kingdom special unit. I played as Ireland and they had Hobilar's cavalry. More well-established empires like Byzantium will have cataphracts, Roman infantry, and pronoias. I don't know if I said that right, but they have multiple units, not just one. So aside from your kingdom-specific units, you then have local units. These are units that are obviously local to the area. They're not fully unique, but sometimes they might just be local to a few places. So for instance, men-at-arms can be recruited in much of mainland Europe, but not on the British Isles. Lastly, there's unique special units, and these are units that are considered special to that particular area. They might be in a few different places, but they're typically quite rare and quite expensive. An example would be longbowmen, which can be recruited in the south of England, Teutonic Knights in Prussia, Normans in Normandy, and so on. There's 52 units in the game, so not that many in the grand scheme of things, but considering that you can recruit the majority of them depending where you are, you can have quite a diverse roster across your armies. Now, armies are actually typically pretty small, with a limit of just 10 units for the army, including the general. And you can also take 4 pieces of siege equipment on top of that, such as laddermen, trebuchets, catapults, and battering rams. Towns can actually have a garrison of 6 units as well, so you could have 16 defending a town at once. Now, as armies march, they consume food that you have to stop off in towns to replenish, and this is then the same food that you're going to be using for recruiting new units, so high food provinces are really great for recruitment and sustaining armies. You can also fight with 2 armies combined to engage in 20v20 unit battles on land, and I think if you were really trying to max everything out and you attacked a walled settlement, you could have something like 54 units in total, as they could have some extra garrison, and you could have some extra engineering equipment and things like that. Now, when fighting these, the secondary army actually needs to be manually called in, and depending on their distance on the campaign, it's how long they're going to take till they arrive. Now, battles in general are fairly basic. You line up on one side, the enemy lines up on the other, and the goal is just to rout the enemy or kill the enemy commander. Units have a variety of formations, fighting better in tight formations but being more vulnerable to missiles and vice versa, and they also have stamina, so you can only run for a short amount of time. You can actually then go into camp if you want, but battles are so quick, you never really want to do that. But if you really need to recover stamina, you can hop into a camp and then hop back out. It's kind of a weird system. And the entire army will also share a morale modifier that fluctuates depending on how the battle is going. Now, as I said, the pace of battle is extremely fast, and the AI is kind of questionable. They will target your general and keep their army together, but they don't really use the formations or attempt to flank or get behind you. Now, as a result, battles tend to get a bit repetitive once you kind of just find an army composition that you like, and you can kind of just approach enemy fights in the same way. The real challenge is when you're up against more numbers or just a better quality army. Then you really do have to work to take them out unit by unit or try and snipe their general. There's a finite amount of ammo though, so having a ranged advantage eventually kind of wears out as well. Now, the battles are decent, but really considering this released the same year as Rome Total War, there's obviously just no comparison. They're a fun side addition that eventually I've for the most part started skipping. However, I do think that it's mostly down to the AI rather than the mechanics that are on offer. You can play battles in multiplayer, and I'd imagine they'd actually be a lot more tactical and intense that way. Now, if things were slowed down a bit and the scale was just increased, I think I could see these becoming really fun, giving everything else that's already there. I hope that for Knights of Honor 2 they attempt to achieve that. I feel like battles may possibly be so fast due to the option to have the campaign just run in the background during the fights. You'd probably be really eager to get back to your kingdom if things were happening while you were fighting. So that might be a reason that they've sped them up so much, because there's really no need for it. Anyway, speaking of multiplayer, it's a great shame as well that there's no multiplayer campaign in this, because it would be perfect to have large lobbies with 10 or so people all moving armies around this campaign map and fighting out their own battles while the campaign keeps running. I'm not sure how practical that would be, but I'd love to see it happen for the sequel. Now, the last thing to touch on for the game is the court and diplomacy. You have 9 slots available for your knights, and you can hire them from your royal family for free or purchase them from a random pool. They can then be assigned different jobs. A marshal is a general that can lead an army, a spy can be sent to another kingdom, a cleric can increase your piety and the amount of books that you produce. Now, books, it's a whole other resource that you can use to educate characters, to level them up, and also to kind of convert your populations to your culture. You also have landlords that will provide more food in provinces, and builders that will improve the buildings in your provinces. Now, these job roles are a really great addition, but it's really quite frustrating that you can only have 9 forever. So if you have 9 generals, you just can't get anything else. I wish it really increased with your size, just even a little bit, so you could assign more spies and governors over time. I think it's really quite restrictive of a limit, just 9. Like, I barely used anything other than the marshals because of it, and I really wanted to, but I just felt like it was never optimal to not just have more armies. Now, the spy is extremely interesting, and a whole video could really be done on their actions alone. Now, similar to Total War 3 Kingdoms, if you're familiar with it, you can make a spy, send it off to another kingdom, and if that kingdom recruits your spy, you could do a variety of things with it depending on what job they were given by the AI. So if they were to become a general, you can then incite a revolt with an enemy army. If he was a merchant, you could steal the enemy's entire treasury. If they became a cleric, they could eventually work their way up to become the Pope, allowing you to call crusades on other kingdoms. If your spy ends up even becoming king, you could take all of the kingdom's lands or just use that kingdom as a puppet state yourself, declaring wars on whoever you wanted. It's crazy the amount of stuff that you could actually do just with the spy alone. There's even more, you know, if they become a crusader, a rebel, a builder, and so on. Unfortunately, like I said, a whole video could be done on that, and I didn't really get to experience any of it. I've just read about it, and it seems really, really cool and super powerful for what you can do. Now, when it comes to diplomacy, agreements between kingdoms are worked out in a linear fashion. You start with trade, then you get non-aggression, then you get an alliance, and then you can also do royal marriages to further solidify your ties. Now, in fact, if you marry a foreign princess and her father dies, you can actually claim all of his lands. So you can attempt to use a spy to actually assassinate a foreign king if you've already married them to kind of speed that process up. It's pretty cool the kind of intrigue you can do. Now, you also have something called kingdom power, and this is sort of like stability in Paradox games. And fun fact, this actually is a Paradox game. This was published by Paradox Interactive. Now, you pay piety and gold to increase your kingdom power, and doing so will increase your tax yield and the happiness of your population. However, if you break a diplomatic agreement, you suffer a loss in kingdom power, so there can be a big financial cost with not backing up your allies or betraying them. Remember, alliances are done linearly, so you start with a trade, then a non-aggression, then an alliance. So that's 3 kingdom power that you'll be sacrificing right there to break that. So the bigger you are then as well, the more costly it's going to become to increase your kingdom power, and the higher it goes, the more expensive it is to increase it even further. So it can become really hard to manage later on, and if you get really big and you don't have the money to support it, you can start having rebellions everywhere as it kind of trends downwards. And that's really all I have time for in this video. Now, I could go on for a very long time with it. As I said at the top, I really have fallen in love with this game, and it's hard to fully convey it. Something I just haven't really quite got across, I guess, is how wars really work. Moving armies in real time to track each other down, interrupt enemy raids, or save an ongoing siege at the last minute are some of the most fun moments. Because, like I said, it's in real time, you can see that a siege is undergoing, you're marching your army there, and it might just fall right before you get there, and it's so deflating when that happens, but fun at the same time. And the family and diplomacy dynamics with characters are also really fun, as you can actually upgrade characters to make them more powerful. They've got several different skills that they can have, and they can upgrade each skill 3 times. It's really quite deep. And then if they're defeated, they may get captured and you might have to ransom them. The more skills they have, the more costly they are to ransom. I lost one of my best generals when he cost an absurd amount to ransom, and I was just about to have enough to get him, and they actually executed him because I just sacked another one of their towns. So the diplomacy AI is actually really good, you know, they offer you towns or money to end wars, and they'll ask you to come help them in their own. It is really, really great, and the game is just full of these neat ideas and really immersive mechanics. The empire building is deep, but it's also simple at the same time. It just has a lot of dependencies, and the regional recruitment makes facing new enemies fresh, as they're always bringing up new units in the different lands that you conquer as you expand outwards. The game has given me very, very high hopes for Knights of Honor 2 Sovereign, and the game seems to be closely following the original. By no means is the original some sort of perfect game, but there's just so many good mechanics and ideas in there that I highly recommend checking it out. That if you have the time, you know, it's about $5 on Steam right now. If you're not into old games, then pay attention closely to the sequel, set to release later this year, and I'll be covering it on this channel as well. I hope you enjoyed this look at an old classic. I know I didn't quite get to cover everything, there's just so much packed into the game with crusades, different religions, and so on and so forth, but I might cover it again in more detail if people like this video and they want me to do more in future with it before the game comes out, the next one. So that's it, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
You are leaving so soon?